The headset crackled, and Calvin Rourke's voice cut through the cockpit like a blade. He fired me for refusing to clear a cargo verification that would have put the aircraft and everyone tied to it at risk. He thought power came from the title on his badge and the signature at the bottom of a report. He was wrong. The plane was still on the ground, and I was still in control of what kept it safe. I want you to understand this. This story contains dramatized details and AI-enhanced storytelling, created to strengthen its message and emotional clarity. It's meant for reflection, not instruction. If this isn't something you enjoy listening to, please feel free to leave, take a break, and look after your health. My name is Melora Scott. I was the Senior Flight Safety and Cargo Compliance Officer for this carrier 21 years. 0 incidents, thousands of verified departures. My job wasn't speed, it wasn't profit. My job was to make sure that when an aircraft left the runway, it stayed honest to the laws it couldn't negotiate with. The cargo plane rolled forward, heavy and deliberate, engines building pressure beneath the floor. This wasn't takeoff yet, it was commitment. The dangerous part people rarely respected. Container 3 Alpha sat in my display, declared mass balanced too perfectly. Weight doesn't behave like that unless someone adjusted the story upstream. Clear it! Calvin snapped. We're behind schedule. Calvin Rourke was the Director of Logistics Operations, promoted 6 weeks earlier after his uncle joined the board. He spoke in metrics, not mechanics, deadlines, not distances. To him, safety was an obstacle that could be overridden if it delayed momentum. I said no. That was enough for him. You're fired, he said. Get off the aircraft immediately. Fired. On a moving cargo plane, for refusing to falsify a clearance. Outside, runway lights slid past the cockpit windows in clean white lines. Inside, the system waited silent, patient, unforgiving, until liftoff. Every safeguard still answered to one authority. Me. I rested my hand on the panel. Calm, steady. He could terminate my employment. He could not terminate physics. And as long as the wheels were still touching the runway, I remained the final barrier between his decision and a disaster that would never carry his name alone. If you see the sign up button and just scroll past it as if it didn't exist, then maybe I'll open the plane door and seriously consider jumping out to cool off. Pressing sign up won't make you poorer. It won't force you to listen to lengthy advertisements. It just helps keep these life isn't like PowerPoint stories going. If you smile slightly and nod, then stay with me. The aircraft kept rolling, not faster, not slower, just forward. Carried by momentum, no one had bothered to question. That was the danger. Machines don't need permission to continue. They only need silence. I didn't answer Calvin. I looked at the panel instead, the part of the aircraft most executives never touched. Safety doesn't live in meetings. It lives in redundancies built for moments exactly like this. Wheels down, thrust below takeoff threshold. Those 2 indicators mattered more than his voice. As long as the aircraft wasn't airborne, the cargo interlock protocol still belonged to me. He had taken my title. He hadn't taken my function. I entered the sequence calmly, no hesitation, no announcement, just muscle memory earned over 2 decades of departures that never made the news. The system responded with a soft confirmation tone. Cargo bay sealed, transfer locks engaged, external clearance suspended. I felt the change before I saw it. The aircraft resisted itself, a subtle deceleration rippling through the frame. The runway lights slowed their march past the windows. The plane wasn't preparing to fly anymore. What did you do? Calvin demanded. I didn't answer. I watched the indicators settle. Green where it mattered. Yellow where it warned. No red yet. Container 3 Alpha sat isolated behind reinforced bulkheads. Whatever story it was hiding, it wasn't going anywhere now. Weight like that always tells the truth eventually. The engines idled lower. The aircraft was waiting. That pause would trigger escalation. Ground safety, control tower, people whose authority came from procedure, not preference. Once that chain started, it didn't stop for pride. Calvin's voice returned. Quieter this time, controlled. Unlock it. We'll discuss this. People only want discussion when time stops obeying them. I removed my headset and set it beside the panel. My hands were steady, my breathing even. Outside, the runway stretched forward, but the plane no longer chased it. When motion stops, the truth gets louder. The aircraft sat still on the runway, engines idling low, a restrained animal held in place by its own safeguards. Outside the cockpit, ground lights began to flash in new patterns. That was escalation, not panic, procedure. I reopened the diagnostics, not the manifest. The raw data, Container 3 Alpha, had been declared clean balanced, compliant, forgettable. But the internal sensors told a different story. Weight distribution skewed toward the forward bulkhead. Dense, inconsistent. Cargo doesn't do that by accident. I pulled the historical log, 36 hours earlier. The container had been reclassified. Original designation removed. Replacement code entered manually. No automated trace. No secondary authorization. That was the first lie. I adjusted the filter and checked the port of origin. The container hadn't come from where the paperwork said it had. It had been rerouted twice. Each time through facilities Calvin controlled. Facilities known for speed, not scrutiny. I didn't need imagination, I needed math. The mass exceeded the declared threshold by nearly 15%. Too heavy for recycled materials, too compact for standard machinery. Whatever was inside had been chosen carefully and hidden badly. The cockpit door remained closed. Outside, footsteps approached, then stopped. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I could hear urgency in the way people move when time stops protecting them. Calvin's voice came again, filtered now through a different channel. Ground operations, recorded. This is being handled internally, he said. There's no need for inspection. That was the second lie. Internal handling only matters when there's nothing to hide. I tagged the container for independent verification and transmitted the raw sensor data directly to Flight Safety Oversight. Not the summary, not the interpretation, the numbers themselves. Numbers don't take sides. The system acknowledged receipt, outside. I felt the shift not in the aircraft, but in the air around it. Authority changing hands quietly. People who didn't answer to Calvin anymore, stepping into the process. I leaned back in the seat and waited. Just when things start to feel familiar, the story takes a different turn. The cockpit door stayed closed, but I could hear the difference outside. Footsteps no longer rushed, voices lowered, radios clicked twice before anyone answered. That was procedure taking over from panic. The first knock came sharp and controlled. "Flight safety," a voice said through the door. "Ms. Scott, remain seated." I didn't move. I didn't need to. Everything that mattered was already in motion. Calvin's voice cut in immediately, louder than it needed to be. "This is a private logistics issue. She's no longer employed here. I want that lock released now." No one responded to him. That silence told me more than any confirmation ever could. I watched the external feed as 2 ground inspectors approached Container 3 Alpha. They stopped short of it, reading the tag I had attached. Independent verification pending. The words were dull, procedural, unthreatening. They froze everything anyway. Calvin stepped into frame, gesturing hard. "You don't have clearance for that container. Open the aircraft and stand down." One of the inspectors turned to him slowly. "Sir, step back from the cargo." I said, "Open it." Calvin snapped. "You're delaying a critical departure." The inspector didn't raise his voice. "This departure is suspended." That was the moment Calvin understood he wasn't in charge anymore. The cockpit channel crackled. "Ms. Scott," the inspector said. "Can you confirm the basis for the hold? I pressed the transmit key once. Declared mass variance. Manual reclassification without secondary authorization. Sensor data forwarded." A pause. Then received. Calvin lunged toward the door. "She's lying," he said. "This is retaliation. She was fired. Noted." The inspector replied, "Employment status doesn't override safety protocol." That line landed harder than any accusation. The container seals were photographed, serial numbers logged. The exterior scan ran longer than it should have. Too dense, too uniform. Calvin's voice broke. "You're making a mistake." The inspector didn't look at him. "Sir, if there's nothing wrong, this will be quick." That was the third lie Calvin told himself, that speed still favored him. I leaned back in my seat, hands folded, listening as procedure dismantled urgency piece by piece. No shouting, no drama, just steps executed in the correct order. Once a hold is confirmed, time stops being emotional. It becomes measurable. The inspectors didn't rush. They documented every angle of container 3 Alpha, every seal, every discrepancy between what was declared and what was detected. I watched from the cockpit feed as clipboards replaced shouting. Calvin faded into the background. His presence reduced to noise no one needed anymore. The external scan completed. The results stayed on the screen longer than expected. Density too high. Composition inconsistent with listed materials. Thermal signature uneven, like something packed deliberately rather than dumped. Scrap doesn't behave like that. It settles. This didn't. A new channel opened. Not operations. Oversight, Miss Scott, a voice said, steady and neutral. "We're cross-checking the container ID against shipment history." I nodded, even though they couldn't see it. "You'll want the reclassification timestamp," I said. "It was altered manually." There was a pause. "Then we see it." That was when the tone changed again. Not louder, heavier. Calvin tried once more. "This is getting out of hand," he said. "We're losing money by the minute." No one answered him. The oversight officer spoke instead. "This container has been reported lost in a separate inventory audit 2 weeks ago." Silence followed. Real silence. The kind that doesn't need to be filled. Lost shipments don't appear on active runways by accident. They don't get reclassified without witnesses, and they don't end up 15% heavier than declared unless someone wants them to. The words "potential evidence" appeared on my display. That designation changes everything. I felt the aircraft settle, not physically, but administratively. This was no longer about one flight. It was about records, patterns, intent, things that don't disappear when someone gets fired. Calvin backed away from the container. Slowly, like distance might undo documentation. I stayed seated, calm, waiting. He had tried to move fast enough to outrun scrutiny. Instead, he had stopped in the one place where everything gets counted, where numbers stop being suggestions and start becoming proof. There's a moment when people realize the system has moved past them. It's subtle. Voices stop competing, orders turn into requests, and phone calls start happening that were never part of the plan. I heard Calvin make one of those calls. He had stepped away from the inspectors, lowering his voice, turning his back like distance could still protect him. I didn't need to hear the words to know the intent. I'd seen it before, someone trying to reframe a situation before it finished becoming permanent. The oversight channel stayed open. "Ms. Scott," the officer said, "we're expanding the scope." That sentence carries weight. It means the problem isn't contained anymore. It means records are about to be compared to other records, and mismatches don't argue back. I pulled up the cargo movement timeline, not just this flight, the previous ones. Same container ID, same route deviations, same facilities. Each time, the declared mass sat just under the threshold that would trigger automatic inspection. That kind of precision isn't accidental. It's rehearsed. I forwarded the sequence. No commentary, just timestamps. The reply came quickly. "Understood." Outside, a second vehicle arrived unmarked. Deliberate. People stepped out who didn't wear high-visibility vests. They didn't carry clipboards. They carried folders. Calvin saw them too. He stopped pacing. His shoulders tightened. He folded his phone and didn't put it back in his pocket. One of the inspectors approached the cockpit door. "Ms. Scott, we're requesting access to your logs and personal notes related to this flight." I nodded and unlocked the console. "Everything's already timestamped," I said. "Nothing's been altered." "That's good," he replied. "It saves time." Time wasn't on Calvin's side anymore. I watched as one of the new arrivals spoke quietly to him. No accusations, just information exchanged at close range. Calvin's face drained of urgency and filled with calculation, the kind that happens when someone realizes the story they prepared doesn't match the evidence waiting for them. The word pattern appeared on my screen. Patterns are dangerous. One mistake can be excused. Repetition cannot. The aircraft sat unmoving, sealed by process rather than force. Every delay Calvin had tried to outrun had caught up with him all at once. The inspectors worked methodically, documenting seals, logging serial numbers, matching them against records that had already begun contradicting each other. No one rushed. No one raised their voice. This wasn't about catching someone in the act anymore. It was about understanding how long it had been happening. Calvin stood a few steps back, arms crossed, watching, not interfering, not helpful, just present enough to remind himself he still existed in the frame. The first latch gave with a dull, metallic crack. Then the second, when the door finally swung outward. The problem revealed itself without ceremony. Dense, compact cargo packed with intention, not scrap, not excess, not a mistake. Someone exhaled behind me, not relief, recognition. The inspector leaned closer, checking the interior markings. "This doesn't match any declared inventory," he said quietly. "I already knew that. Weight like that always leaves a signature." The oversight officer spoke again, this time slower. "These serials correspond to assets written off last quarter. Written off means insured. Insured means claimed. Claimed means paid." Calvin stepped forward instinctively, then stopped himself. "That's not possible," he said. "Those materials were lost in transit." The inspector didn't look at him. Then they shouldn't be here. Silence settled in layers, the kind that presses down rather than echoes. I watched Calvin's posture change, not collapse, just narrow. His shoulders drew inward, his jaw locked. He was already running calculations in his head, trying to figure out which explanation failed least, but explanations weren't being requested. Documentation replaced dialogue, photos, numbers, cross-references. The container stopped being cargo and became an index. One of the officers turned toward me. "Ms. Scott, we'll need you to remain available." "I am," I said. Calvin finally looked at me then. Not angry, not defiant, just measuring distance, how far the situation had moved beyond him. Calvin waited until the inspectors turned away. He didn't approach me at first. He adjusted his jacket, smoothed the front like he was stepping into a meeting instead of out of one. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than before. Careful, practiced. "Melora," he said, "we don't need to let this go any further." I didn't turn my head. I kept my eyes on the console, watching the timestamp continue its quiet work. Evidence doesn't rush. It accumulates. He moved closer. Not too close. Close enough to sound reasonable. "There's been a misunderstanding. Processes get messy at scale. We can fix this internally." Internally? That word again. I'd heard it my entire career. It always arrived right before accountability left. "You were fired," he continued. "But that can be reversed. Immediately, title restored. Compensation adjusted. We can say this was a procedural disagreement. No harm done, no harm." Outside, the container sat open under portable lights, its contents documented from every angle. Numbers were already leaving the runway, traveling to places Calvin didn't control. I finally looked at him. "What you're asking," I said calmly, "is for me to rewrite a record that already exists." He smiled tightly. "Records get corrected all the time, not once they're copied." I replied. That was when the edge slipped. Just slightly. "You don't understand the consequences," he said. "If this escalates, it won't stop with me. Careers end, departments disappear." That was the threat, dressed up as concern. I leaned back in the seat. "You should have thought about that before you changed the manifest." His expression froze. Not denial, confirmation. He exhaled slowly. "Tell me what you want. I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. I want the system to finish what it started, I said. Without interference. Calvin straightened. The mask dropped completely. He looked past me, toward the runway, toward the people no longer waiting for his instructions. This doesn't have to happen, he said. I nodded once. It already has. He stepped away then, the space between us widening in a way no negotiation could close. The decision didn't come with an announcement. It arrived quietly, the way real authority always does. 2 additional vehicles pulled onto the runway perimeter, their lights steady, not flashing. People stepped out who didn't introduce themselves. They didn't need to. Their presence changed the flow immediately. Inspectors deferred. Radios shifted channels. Calvin stopped speaking altogether. One of them approached the container and read the report without asking questions. Another compared it to a tablet already loaded with information. No one looked surprised. That told me this wasn't their first version of the story, just the first time they were seeing it in daylight. Calvin was asked to step aside. Not escorted, not restrained, just removed from the center of things. That's the moment people misunderstand. They think the absence of force means the absence of danger. It doesn't. It means the outcome is already decided. I remained in the cockpit, hands resting where they had been for hours. No one told me to leave. No one needed to. I was part of the record now, not the problem. The oversight officer spoke into the channel. Ms. Scott, the aircraft will remain grounded pending further review. You're cleared to disengage from active duty. Cleared, not dismissed. I powered down the console carefully, one system at a time, each shutdown logged, each action time-stamped. When I finally removed my headset, the silence felt earned. Outside, Calvin was being briefed, not accused, not threatened, just informed. He nodded too often, the way people do when they're trying to slow something that no longer listens. One of the officers approached me. "You did the right thing," he said. I didn't respond. Right and wrong aren't why systems exist. They exist because people fail predictably. I stepped down from the aircraft and onto the tarmac. The night air felt different at ground level, cooler, heavier, final. Behind me, the cargo plane sat motionless, its urgency dismantled piece by piece. Calvin looked at me once as I passed, not with anger, with calculation. He was still trying to solve it, but the problem was no longer operational. It was procedural, and procedures don't negotiate once they take over. By morning, the runway looked ordinary again. The aircraft was still there, sealed and silent, but the urgency had drained out of it. What remained was paperwork, timelines, and people whose job was to make sure nothing like this faded quietly. I was released without ceremony. No apology, no reinstatement offer, delivered with confidence. Just acknowledgement. That was enough. Calvin was not. I didn't see him leave. I didn't need to. Systems don't require witnesses when they close in. I knew what would follow: interviews, audits, records pulled from places he assumed no one checked. The kind of slow, methodical dismantling that doesn't make headlines but ends careers permanently. I walked across the tarmac as the sun lifted, my boots echoing against concrete that had carried far heavier mistakes than mine. Somewhere behind me, the container was being cataloged, its contents no longer hidden by motion or authority. I hadn't planned any of it. I had only refused to lie. That refusal had been enough. People like Calvin believe power comes from speed moving fast enough that no one stops to ask why. They forget that systems are built to do exactly that. Stop, count. Remember, I left the airport knowing one thing with certainty: I might have lost my job that night, but I hadn't lost my role. And the runway, once quiet again, carried the weight of a truth that wouldn't be cleared for departure. Stories like this aren't really about winning or losing a job. They're about the quiet moment when you realize that doing the right thing can cost you something and deciding to do it anyway. I didn't walk away feeling heroic. I felt tired, steady, and strangely calm. What stayed with me wasn't the conflict, but the reminder that systems, rules, and integrity only work if someone is willing to stand still long enough to let them work. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to fight back, but to refuse to lie, even when it would be easier. If you've ever been in a situation where speaking up felt risky, where silence seemed safer, I hope this story resonated with you. And if you're listening right now, I'm curious, where are you listening from today? A kitchen table, a long drive, a quiet room after a long shift? Tell me in the comments, I really do read them. If this story meant something to you, consider liking and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you'd like more stories like this, calm, honest, and grounded in real choices, subscribe and stay with us. We're not here to shout. We're here to remember what still matters.